Welcome everyone and thank you for coming. My name is Santiago Leon. I'm a finance major with a minor in data analytics, and today I'm here to share my research on corporate taxation, specifically in Chile, and whether it amplified economic deceleration. So before we get started, I want to show you the countries in the Organization of Economic Development and Cooperation. As you can see, Chile joined them during the 2010s. 91% of those countries decided to lower corporate taxes in the last 2 decades. However, Chile did the opposite. So why I got interested in this topic? So corporate taxes is usually something that is talked about in political debates, whether the left talks about raising corporate taxes to get more revenue, and the right talks about lowering them to have a more pro-business and pro-investment agenda for a country. So the promise sounds simple, right? So raise corporate taxes and just get more revenue. But I wanted to test this idea with the data. So in today's agenda, I'm going to first talk about Chile's economic history. Then I will dive into the corporate tax reform, what it implied, and what happened in 2014. Then I will dive into the 3 channels that I studied to see if this amplified economic deceleration or it did not. So those are domestic investment and growth, foreign direct investment, that is foreign entities allocating money into a country, and lastly, whether this reform hit the targets of 3% of GDP or it did not. Then I will show you the evidence and what it suggests, and I will paint you like a picture of the current situation that Chile is going through. So why Chile was seen as an economic miracle? During the 1990s, Chile was growing a real GDP growth rate of around 6% every year throughout the 90s. Also, GDP per capita was growing at the same rate at around 5.6%. We also see a cut in poverty of around 50%, coming from around 40% to 21.7%. So Chile was often talked about in journals as the economic stable country around the region, and it was often painted as the best in security of economics, open economy for business, and also have strong institutions. Throughout my presentation, I will use sources like the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Development and Cooperation, and the World Bank. All 3 serve as the gold standard for economic theory. So what changed in 2014? So Chile's corporate tax rate went from 20% all the way to 27%. Also, it's important to notice that Chile had a system that firms could defer taxes on profits. So they could pay those taxes in the future as long as they reinvested in the business. That helped domestic growth, future growth, for employment, investment in technology, equipment, and expansion. So this was eliminated after 2014. So the overall objective of this reform was to achieve a 3% of GDP in revenue. So before we get started, I want to give you a perspective on what affects corporate taxes in the countries, right? So these are some sources I use for different papers, and basically higher corporate taxes have reduced return on investments on a project. So it's very important for firms, if they wanted to reinvest in expansion, they're not going to have the same money if they have higher corporate taxes. Also, these papers notice that developing countries are often more sensitive to these kind of changes, specifically because money can move across borders. If this country I don't like because they raise corporate taxes, I can move to Peru or Argentina, right? So Chile's reform reduced incentives to retain earnings and push some firms towards debt financing. When a firm goes towards debt financing, that means they have to pay interest, right? So that also diminishes profit that the business has. So in conclusion of this, we know that tax policy changes incentives and not just revenue. So let's talk about the 3 channels that I looked for evidence. So first, domestic investment. Local firms and retain earnings into the Chilean system, and whether they were supporting capital long-term formation and future growth. I also looked into foreign direct investment. So we can see that foreign direct investment, their main purpose is for business expansion, to bring those capitals to Chile, to add technology, add jobs, and have better external financing for those companies. And lastly, I looked into tax revenue and whether the reform actually hit the targets. So let's talk about the first channel, growth and investment. Chile's average GDP before the reform was implemented was around 5.4%. After the reform, we see a significant drop to 1.75% in growth of GDP. Also, gross fixed capital formation fell about 3.7% of GDP between 2012 and 2016, pointing to also weaker domestic investment. And this can be explained simply by the tax deferral that I talked to before, right? So if the business doesn't have that tax deferral, so they can have that reinvestment into the current environment, then they will not invest as much in the future. So this is consistent with the idea that higher corporate taxes and the end of these incentives were reducing the growth and investment, right? But also it's important to notice that copper prices were also falling at the same time after the implementation of this reform. So this is not only about the change in corporate taxation, but it's also about copper prices. And to give you a better idea, Chile's main economy is copper. They're the world's largest exporter of copper in the world. Also, other industries are important. Chile is the fourth largest for wine exports in the world, and the second largest for salmon, right? And lastly, it has 1/4 of the total lithium reserves in the world. So let's look into the second channel that I was interested into. It was foreign direct investment, right? So foreign direct investment peaked at a 12% rate in 2012. That's of GDP. And then at the current levels is sitting at a decline of around 3.8% of GDP. The Organization of Economic Development often talks about Chile foreign direct investment became much more, their objective was much more focused on extractives, that's copper and mining, and not so much into industries like manufacturing and services, that those see bigger benefits for the broader population in terms of jobs and salaries. So we see that tax policy incentives matters, especially in open economies, as I mentioned before. So the third channel was, did revenue actually deliver? So I talked before that the target was 3% of GDP, and we can see that it only achieved 1.5% of GDP. So from $8.2 billion that was the target to fund education and healthcare, it only achieved 4.1 billion. And this can be explained, as I talked before, by the slower growth, the decline in foreign direct investment, and overall a weaker tax base that diminished the return. But also I wanted to point out again that there was a difficult external economic conditions. Copper prices were falling, and Chile was not the only country affected. As you can see in this graph, I try to compare Chile with Peru and Colombia. Three of those economies focus on extractives. Peru, a good comparison because of copper, and Colombia for oil. As you can see, Chile had the biggest slowdown after this external shock of 67.6% compared to Peru of 54.5% and Colombia 43.9%. So Chile's slowdown was actually worse, and that could be explained because these reforms actually amplified this economic problem. So the timing was very important. So the corporate tax reform was exacerbating an already challenging environment. So what is my conclusion here? During 2014, likely the reform amplified economic deceleration, but the evidence is suggestive rather than definitive. So we saw weaker incentives for reinvestment, foreign direct investment fell drastically, and then revenue gains missed 50% of the targets. But it's also important to notice that copper prices were still the major external conditions for this decline. So I also wanted to show you a current picture. Right now, Chile elected a right-wing leader. His proposal is cutting the 27% tax to 23% to remain more competitive in the region and following the Organization of Economic Development standards, that it's setting the corporate tax rate around 23 to 24%. He also thinks that this will recover growth, bring back the foreign direct investment, and also aid a job market that has been stalling. As we can see, women are the major affected group during these days. They're almost hitting unemployment levels of two digits, sitting at around 9%. So he wants to help with this. And actually, the first 30 days, he saw a record in investment never seen before in Chile. And that's because his proposal of the tax cut has been seen as businesses they want to invest in the country, right? So this poses the same question. will it truly achieve faster economic growth in Chile or just simply fall short of expectations? Thank you.
Are there questions for Santiago? Yes.
Thank you so much, Santi. I'm curious to know what was the public reception to the 2014 reform change, and how does the public feel now with the introduction of a new bill to cut corporate taxes?
So Chile is divided very politically with the right and left, but that reform was seen as the right thinking, okay, it's going to decelerate the country, but the left felt that it actually served for making education better and healthcare. But yeah, there's like a misperception, but even today, leftist economists have talked about they actually think that lowering corporate taxes could bring more incentives for growth and the job market. I will open up for one more question.
Could you say a little bit about the data? Oh, sorry. I want to take
It's
Could you say a little bit more about the data that you looked at? Because I know that you worked with Dr. Escola, and this came out of a data analysis class. What was the body of data that you looked at?
So I mean, with economic theory, you can look at 100 drivers of why an economy is decelerating. I try to focus on the main 3 ones, and basically I looked into data that it was like thousands of rows of the World Bank. And that's how I got to my analysis. Well, thank you so much for coming. I hope you learned something, and yeah.
Working on this project together and present Santiago with the cord installed and will wear in a few weeks at graduation, and like with our other presenters, these are symbols not only of the successful completion of a wonderful thesis, but really of 4 years of amazing work, of going and interning in New York, of excelling in your classes, and being a great honors student for the last 4 years. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've only known Santi for about a year, and some of the students who I had before told me, oh, our friend's going to take your data science courses. Okay, that's cool, great. And a few weeks into the course, I went back and I talked to him. I said, who is this guy? Like, he's so good, so smart. My courses have a lot of presentations, and I remember the very first one he pulls up, and everybody just kind of stops and looks at him, and the rest of the semester, everyone just tried to copy Santi. Like you would basically see like, here's Santi, and how close can anybody else get for all that? And I feel like, that says a lot about where he's at now, but the part that was really exciting for me is, there's lots of smart people in the world. We all know smart people, but one of the early things he said to me came up, and he said, I really want you to be way more critical on me. I want you to tell me a lot more of the things I can improve because I'm not good enough, and I want to get better at everything. And just how cool is that to be a very impressive person, but then at the same time not just think of yourself as I'm great. Like no one can tell me anything from here. And so it's cool. Like on the one hand, I'm sad that I'm not going to get to be involved with you anymore, but at the same time, there's people again that I look at, and when they leave, I think I have no concerns. I have no concerns about how they're going to do when they get out of here. So it's really cool to see that. I'm really excited to see where you end up next and to come back and for making St. Ed's proud. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, other. Oh.
Can I please take a photo with